Marcus Chen stared at his reflection in the hotel bathroom mirror, adjusting his designer sunglasses even though it was nearly sunset in London. At 32, he had everything money could buy: a mansion in Silicon Valley, a collection of sports cars, and a tech company worth millions. But tonight, he craved something money couldn't buy: attention. "This is going to break the internet," he mumbled to himself, patting the can of construction foam hidden in his jacket pocket. He had purchased it earlier that day from a local hardware store, along with other supplies for what he considered would be the greatest prank video ever. The early October evening was surprisingly warm for London. Marcus stumbled slightly as he walked out of his five-star hotel near Buckingham Palace, the effects of expensive whiskey evident in his unsteady gait. A group of tourists nearby pointed their cameras at the palace gates, taking photos of the famous royal guards in their distinctive red uniforms and bearskin hats. Marcus checked his phone, making sure the camera settings were perfect. He had already informed his social media team back in California to be ready for the upcoming viral content. His last video, where he had pretended to faint in front of a famous celebrity, had gotten 5 million views. But this would be different. He pushed through the crowd of tourists, ignoring their annoyed glances. His expensive cologne and designer clothes made him stand out among the casual visitors. A young woman tried to take a selfie, but Marcus blocked her shot, earning him a frustrated sigh. The royal guard stood perfectly still, as they always did. This particular guard, James Barrett, had been standing at his post for nearly 4 hours. At 28, Barrett was a decorated veteran who had served in Afghanistan before joining the Queen's Guard. To him, this position was the highest honor, a continuation of his service to the crown and country. Marcus approached slowly, pretending to pose for a regular tourist photo. His hand gripped the can of construction foam in his pocket, his heart racing with anticipation. The alcohol in his system dampened any remaining sense of judgment he might have had. "Hey, man, smile for me," Marcus shouted, getting unnecessarily close to Barrett. The guard remained motionless, maintaining his professional composure despite the tourists' increasingly aggressive behavior. Other visitors began to notice the commotion, some pulling out their phones to record what they assumed would be typical tourist foolishness. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Marcus pulled out the can of construction foam, shook it quickly, and before anyone could react, sprayed it directly at Barrett's face. The thick, yellow foam covered the guard's eyes, nose, and mouth, immediately causing him to break his stance and gasp for air. The crowd erupted in shocked screams. Several people rushed forward to help, while others continued filming. Barrett, trained to maintain composure under pressure, was now struggling to breathe as the chemical foam burned his skin and blocked his airways. "World star," Marcus yelled, laughing as he tried to run away, still filming with his phone. He made it exactly 3 steps before being tackled by 2 plainclothed security officers who had been monitoring the area. His expensive phone skidded across the pavement, cracking on impact. "Get off me! Do you know who I am?" Marcus shouted as the officers handcuffed him. His designer jacket was torn, and his sunglasses lay broken nearby. The reality of his situation hadn't yet penetrated his alcohol-addled mind. Meanwhile, Barrett was receiving emergency medical attention. His fellow guards had rushed to his aid, carefully trying to remove the foam while waiting for paramedics. The chemical substance had already caused visible burns on his skin, and his breathing was becoming more labored. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as they approached Buckingham Palace. Tourists who had witnessed the incident were already uploading their videos to social media, but not with the reaction Marcus had hoped for. Comments expressing outrage and disgust started pouring in within minutes. As Marcus was led away by police, still struggling and shouting about his rights and his wealth, a small crowd gathered around Barrett. The proud guard, who had served his country in war and peace, was being loaded into an ambulance, his uniform stained with the yellow foam that would change both men's lives forever. The sun set over London that evening, casting long shadows across the palace grounds. News vans were already arriving, their reporters preparing to broadcast the story of how a rich tourist's quest for social media fame had resulted in one of the most shocking incidents in recent Royal Guard history. And this was only the beginning of a story that would captivate the world in the days to come. Marcus Chen sat in a cold holding cell at the Charing Cross police station, his designer clothes now wrinkled and stained. The effects of alcohol were wearing off, replaced by a growing sense of dread. Through the small window in his cell, he could hear officers discussing his case, their British accents thick with disgust. 3 cells down, his cell phone and belongings sat in an evidence bag. The device kept buzzing with notifications. His social media was exploding, but not in the way he had planned. The videos of his attack had indeed gone viral, turning him into an internet sensation for all the wrong reasons. Meanwhile, at St. Thomas Hospital, James Barrett was undergoing emergency treatment. The construction foam had caused second-degree chemical burns around his eyes, nose, and mouth. Doctors worked carefully to remove every trace of the substance while monitoring his breathing. His wife, Sarah, a primary school teacher, sat in the waiting room, her hands shaking as she read the flood of messages from family and friends who had seen the news. "Mrs. Barrett?" A nurse called out. "Your husband is asking for you." Sarah rushed into the treatment room, fighting back tears at the sight of her strong husband lying vulnerable on the hospital bed. James's face was red and swollen, with patches of raw skin where the foam had burned deepest. His eyes were bandaged, and an oxygen mask covered his mouth. The bloody idiot didn't even realize it was industrial-grade foam, James whispered through the mask, attempting to make light of the situation despite his pain. Sarah squeezed his hand, amazed at his ability to stay positive even now. Back at Buckingham Palace, the incident had triggered a full security review. Senior officials huddled in emergency meetings, discussing how a tourist had managed to get so close with a dangerous substance. The remaining guards stood at their posts with increased vigilance, even as tourists continued to snap photos. Marcus's situation was getting worse by the hour. His company's board of directors had called an emergency meeting in Silicon Valley. The video of him attacking Barrett had reached over 10 million views in just 3 hours. His company's stock price was plummeting as #BoycottChentech trended worldwide. In his cell, Marcus finally got to meet with his hastily arranged lawyer, Elizabeth Morton, a top criminal defense attorney in London. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice stern, "do you understand the severity of what you've done? You're facing charges of assault, harassment, and violating protected site regulations. The Crown takes attacks on royal guards very seriously." Marcus slumped in his chair. "I was just trying to make a viral video," he mumbled, sounding more like a scared child than a tech millionaire. "Well, congratulations," Morton replied dryly. "You've succeeded in that regard. Now, let's focus on keeping you out of prison." The media circus outside the police station grew larger as news vans from around the world gathered. Headlines flashed across screens globally. "Tech millionaire attacks royal guard. Silicon Valley ego goes too far. Guard hospitalized after tourist's cruel prank." At the hospital, James Barrett received unexpected visitors. Representatives from the royal family had arrived to express their concern and support. They brought with them a personal letter from the king, thanking Barrett for his service and promising full support for his recovery. Social media took an unexpected turn as people began sharing stories of Barrett's military service. Photos emerged of him serving in Afghanistan, helping local children, and receiving medals for bravery. A stark contrast was drawn between the dedicated serviceman and the attention-seeking millionaire who had attacked him. By nightfall, Marcus's world had completely unraveled. His company's board had suspended him indefinitely. His passport was confiscated, and bail was set at £100,000, a sum that would barely dent his bank account but symbolized the weight of his actions. In the hospital, James Barrett finally drifted off to sleep, the pain medication providing some relief. Sarah stayed by his side, reading him messages of support that poured in from around the world. A GoFundMe page set up by a fellow guard had already raised £20,000 in just a few hours. As London slept, 2 men's lives had been forever altered by a few seconds of thoughtless action. James Barrett would face weeks of recovery, while Marcus Chen would learn that money couldn't shield him from the consequences of his actions. The story was far from over, and tomorrow would bring new challenges for both men, one fighting to heal, the other fighting to avoid imprisonment in a foreign land. The courtroom at Westminster Magistrates' Court fell silent as Marcus Chen was led in, wearing a plain grey suit instead of his usual designer clothes. 2 weeks had passed since the incident, and his preliminary hearing was about to begin. The once confident tech millionaire now looked pale and nervous, his eyes darting around the wood-paneled room. His lawyer, Elizabeth Morton, sat ready with a stack of documents. She had spent days preparing for this moment, knowing that the eyes of the world were watching. The public gallery was packed with journalists, their pens poised to capture every detail. "All rise," called the court officer as District Judge Michael Sanders entered. The gravity of the situation finally seemed to hit Marcus as he stood, his legs shaking slightly. The prosecutor, Richard Wells, presented the Crown's case with methodical precision. "Your Honor, what we have here is not merely a foolish prank, but a calculated attack on a member of the Queen's Guard. Mr. Chen purchased industrial-grade construction foam with the specific intention of assaulting Guard Barrett for social media fame. Evidence was presented showing Marcus's social media history, a pattern of increasingly dangerous pranks for views and likes. His team's emails discussing viral potential and shock value were read aloud, making him sink lower in his seat." Meanwhile, across London at the military hospital, James Barrett was undergoing his third treatment for chemical burns. The doctors were optimistic about his recovery, but the psychological scars ran deep. Every time he closed his eyes, he could feel the foam hitting his face, the burning sensation, the panic of not being able to breathe. Back in court, Morton presented her client's defense. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge the severity of Mr. Chen's actions, we must consider that this was an act of drunken foolishness rather than malicious intent. My client is prepared to make full restitution and has already pledged a significant donation to veterans' charities." The judge's response was swift and stern. "Mr. Chen, your wealth does not give you the right to treat others as props for your entertainment. This court takes a very serious view of attacks on ceremonial guards." Marcus was denied bail due to flight risk, despite offering to surrender his passport and post a £1 million bond. As he was led away to Wandsworth Prison to await trial, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in a window. Gone were the designer sunglasses and confident smirk, replaced by a haunted look of someone finally facing consequences. In Silicon Valley, the board of Chen Technologies called an emergency shareholders meeting. The company's stock had dropped 30% since the incident, and major clients were threatening to pull their contracts. In a unanimous vote, Marcus was officially removed as CEO. Social media, which had once been Marcus's playground, turned into his prison. Every post about him was filled with scathing comments. Former friends and business associates publicly distanced themselves. Even his luxury apartment complex in San Francisco issued a statement condemning his actions. James Barrett's story, however, took a different turn. The GoFundMe campaign had reached £250,000, with donations coming from around the world. Military veterans organizations rallied around him, and several royal family members had visited him privately. In his prison cell, Marcus spent his days writing letters to his family, to his former employees, and most importantly, to James Barrett. The letter to Barrett took him 3 days to write, as he struggled to find words to express genuine remorse rather than just fear of punishment. His lawyer visited with updates about his case. The prosecution had mountains of evidence: the purchase of the foam, surveillance footage, witness statements, and his own social media history. They were pushing for the maximum sentence. "Be prepared for a lengthy trial," Morton advised. "The media attention isn't going away, and the prosecution wants to make an example of you." Marcus nodded silently, thinking about how a few seconds of thoughtless action had destroyed everything he'd built over the past decade. His company, his reputation, his freedom, all gone because he thought it would make a good video. As the day ended, 2 men lay awake in very different circumstances. James Barrett in his hospital bed, surrounded by cards and flowers from well-wishers, focusing on his recovery, and Marcus Chen on his prison cot, finally understanding that some things in life couldn't be fixed with money or social media influence. The legal machinery moved forward slowly but inexorably, promising to bring justice to one man and punishment to another. The world watched and waited as a simple quest for viral fame transformed into a cautionary tale about privilege, responsibility, and consequences. 1 month after the incident, the internet had transformed Marcus Chen from a tech celebrity into a global symbol of entitled behavior. In his prison cell, Marcus had no direct access to the internet, but his lawyer kept him informed of the growing backlash. His once popular social media accounts, now managed by his crisis team, had lost millions of followers. Even his old viral videos were being reposted with critical commentary about his history of disrespecting others for views. "Your former company's stock has stabilized," Elizabeth Morton told him during a visit. shuffling through papers, but only after they announced plans to donate all your remaining shares to veterans' charities. Marcus winced at the news, realizing his $300 million stake in the company was gone forever. The public's interest in James Barrett had also intensified. Military records revealed his heroic actions in Afghanistan, where he had saved 3 fellow soldiers during an ambush. Newspapers ran features about his working-class background and his dedication to service. A documentary crew had even started filming a piece about the traditions and sacrifices of the Queen's Guard. Sarah Barrett, James's wife, found herself thrust into the spotlight as well. After giving one heartfelt interview about her husband's recovery, she had received thousands of supportive messages. Schools across Britain had started a Respect for Service campaign, using the incident to teach children about honor and responsibility. Meanwhile, Marcus's personal life unraveled further. His girlfriend of 2 years publicly ended their relationship on social media, describing him as emotionally immature and obsessed with attention. His luxury car collection in California was seized to pay legal fees and potential damages. Former business partners came forward with stories of his previous problematic behavior. The prison guards at Wandsworth noticed a change in Marcus. The cocky millionaire who had arrived weeks ago now spent hours staring at the wall, speaking little to anyone. His only visitors were his lawyer and a prison counselor who was helping him process the magnitude of his actions. One afternoon, a letter arrived for Marcus. It was from his mother in California. "My son, your father and I raised you better than this. We came to this country with nothing, worked cleaning houses and delivering newspapers to put you through good schools. Now our family name is shamed. You must find a way to make this right." The letter left Marcus in tears for the first time since his arrest. The reality of how far he had fallen finally hit him fully. Across London, James Barrett was making steady progress in his recovery. The burns on his face were healing, though doctors warned some scarring might be permanent. More challenging was the psychological recovery. Sudden loud noises or people approaching too quickly could trigger panic attacks. The public's response to Barrett's situation highlighted a broader conversation about social media culture and respect for tradition. Essays and opinion pieces debated the impact of influence culture on society. Several popular influencers even deleted old prank videos, acknowledging the potential harm of such content. Marcus's case became a warning example in business schools and social media marketing courses. His story was featured in case studies about the dangers of prioritizing viral fame over human dignity. Some Silicon Valley companies began requiring ethics training for their executives, specifically citing the Chen incident. The guards at Buckingham Palace noticed an immediate change in tourist behavior. People were more respectful, keeping their distance and showing appreciation rather than treating the guards as photo props. Several tourists even brought flowers and cards for Barrett's family. Late one night, as Marcus lay on his prison cot, he overheard 2 guards discussing his case. "Can't believe he thought he'd get away with it just because he's rich," one said. "Money can't buy common sense," the other replied. Marcus pulled his thin blanket tighter, remembering the days when he'd slept on silk sheets in his penthouse apartment. Now his future held only uncertainty and the growing weight of public judgment. The media circus showed no signs of slowing down. News outlets continued to analyze every aspect of the story: the tech industry's culture, the role of social media, the treatment of public servants, and the price of fame. Marcus Chen had wanted to create viral content, and he had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, just not in the way he had hoped. As the sun set over London, 2 narratives continued to unfold: a story of dignity and resilience in the face of adversity, and a cautionary tale about the devastating consequences of treating life like a social media stunt. 6 weeks after the attack, James Barrett stood in front of his bathroom mirror, gently touching the healing skin on his face. The angry red marks had faded to pink, and his doctors were pleased with his physical recovery. His wife Sarah watched from the doorway, remembering how different things had looked just a few weeks ago. "The new skin treatment is working well," James said, applying a special cream the hospital had provided. The medical bills would have been overwhelming if not for the public's generosity. The GoFundMe campaign had now reached over £500,000, allowing Sarah to take extended leave from her teaching job to support his recovery. That morning, James had his first official therapy session to address his PTSD. The therapist, Dr. Rachel Howard, specialized in treating military veterans. As James sat in her comfortable office, the words came easier than he expected. "I keep thinking about my time in Afghanistan," he told her. "We faced real danger there, bullets and bombs. But somehow, this feels different. I never expected to be attacked at home, doing ceremonial duties." Dr. Howard listened carefully, taking notes. "It's a different kind of trauma," she explained. "In Afghanistan, you were prepared for danger. This attack violated your sense of safety in what should have been a secure environment." Back at their modest London flat, James and Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Colonel William Matthews, James's commanding officer, arrived with news that would change their lives. "Barrett," the colonel said formally, "His Majesty has taken a personal interest in your case. The palace is offering you a new position, training incoming guards and overseeing ceremonial procedures. It's an advisory role, away from direct public contact, but still serving the crown." James sat quietly, processing the information. The position would allow him to continue serving while accommodating his recovery. Sarah squeezed his hand, knowing this could be exactly what he needed. The media had maintained interest in James's story, but in a different way now. Documentaries focused on the dedication of the Queen's Guard, using his experience to highlight the human side of these stoic figures. Schools invited him to speak about service and resilience, though he was still working up the courage to accept these invitations. During his daily physiotherapy sessions, James pushed himself harder than the therapists recommended. His military discipline showed in every exercise, every stretch, every small victory over pain and limitation. "Slow down, Mr. Barrett," his physiotherapist often warned. "Recovery is a marathon, not a sprint." But it wasn't just physical healing that occupied his days. The attack had affected him in unexpected ways. Crowds made him nervous now, and the sound of aerosol sprays could trigger panic attacks. Yet he faced each challenge with the same determination that had earned him military honors. Sarah noticed other changes too. James spoke more about his feelings, something he'd rarely done before. He spent more time with their young daughter, Emma, reading stories and helping with homework. The incident had shifted his priorities, making him value these quiet moments more than ever. One evening, as they sat in their small garden, Sarah found James looking through the thousands of support messages they'd received. People from around the world had shared their own stories of overcoming trauma, creating an unexpected community of support. "It's strange," James said, scrolling through the messages. "Something so horrible has brought out so much good in people." The medical team remained optimistic about his long-term recovery. The scarring would continue to fade, though some marks might remain permanent, a visible reminder of that fateful day. But James had begun to see these marks differently, not as wounds but as badges of resilience. His fellow guards kept in regular contact, visiting when their duties allowed. They brought updates about changes at the palace, new security measures, stricter tourist guidelines, better protection for the guards. James's experience had led to meaningful improvements in their working conditions. As night fell over London, James stood at his window, looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow would bring more challenges. Another therapy session, more medical treatments, the ongoing journey of recovery. But he felt stronger now, supported by his family, his colleagues, and countless strangers who had shown him that human dignity could triumph over thoughtless cruelty. Sarah joined him at the window, wrapping her arms around him. They stood together in comfortable silence, both knowing that while the attack had changed their lives forever, it hadn't broken them. Instead, it had revealed strengths they never knew they had, and showed them the very best of human nature in response to its worst. The Old Bailey courthouse stood imposing against the grey London sky as Marcus Chen faced the most important day of his life. 3 months after the incident, his trial was finally beginning. He sat in the defendant's box wearing a modest navy suit, a deliberate choice by his legal team to distance him from his former flashy image. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the public gallery, their pencils poised over notepads. James Barrett sat with his wife in a special section, his face showing the fading but still visible marks of the attack. The judge, Mrs. Justice Helena Whitmore, regarded the assembly with stern attention. "The Crown versus Marcus Chen," the clerk announced, his voice echoing through the hushed courtroom. The prosecutor stood, adjusting his weight before addressing the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this case is about more than a momentary lapse in judgment. It's about a calculated act of violence committed for social media fame. Video evidence played on screens throughout the courtroom. The footage showed multiple angles of the attack, including Marcus's own phone recording. The jury watched intently as the scene unfolded. The approach, the assault, the immediate aftermath. Several jurors visibly winced at the sight of James Barrett struggling to breathe. Marcus couldn't watch. He stared at his hands, his face reddening with shame. His time in custody had changed him. Gone was the arrogant tech millionaire who thought money could solve any problem. In his place sat a man who finally understood the weight of his actions. The prosecution called their witnesses. Security officers described the chaos of the scene. Medical experts detailed Barrett's injuries, showing photographs of chemical burns and explaining the potential long-term effects. A social media expert analyzed Marcus's history of escalating pranks for views. During a brief recess, Elizabeth Morton prepared her client for the most crucial moment, his testimony. Be honest, show genuine remorse, she advised. The jury needs to see you've changed. When Marcus took the stand, his voice trembled. I was obsessed with attention, he admitted. Each video had to be more shocking than the last. I lost sight of reality, of basic human decency. I treated people like props in my personal show. The prosecutor's cross-examination was brutal. Mr. Chen, did you research the effects of construction foam before purchasing it? No, sir. Did you consider guard Barrett's safety at all? No, sir. Were you more concerned with filming his reaction than his well-being? Marcus paused, fighting back tears. Yes, sir, I was. But the most powerful moment came when James Barrett took the stand. He spoke quietly but firmly about the attack's impact on his life. The nightmares, the panic attacks, the way his young daughter was afraid to hug him while his face was healing. The physical pain was terrible, Barrett testified, but knowing someone would do this just for social media likes, that hurt more. We guards stand there protecting centuries of tradition, and he turned it into a joke for views. Sarah Barrett's testimony moved several jurors to tears as she described the weeks of recovery, the fear of permanent damage, and the way their lives had changed forever. Marcus's lawyer presented character witnesses, former employees who spoke of his charitable works, mental health experts who discussed the corrupting influence of social media fame, even his mother, who tearfully described her son's childhood dreams of making the world better through technology. In her closing argument, Morton emphasized her client's remorse and rehabilitation. Mr. Chen's actions were inexcusable, but he stands before you a changed man, ready to accept responsibility and make amends. The prosecutor's closing was equally powerful. No number of charitable donations or apologies can erase the deliberate choice to assault a man doing his duty. This court must send a message that such behavior has consequences, regardless of wealth or status. As the jury left to deliberate, an unusual calm settled over the courtroom. Marcus sat quietly, knowing these strangers held his fate in their hands. Barrett and his wife waited patiently, holding hands. Hours passed. The tension in the courtroom grew with each passing minute. Finally, the jury returned. The foreman stood, holding a piece of paper that would determine Marcus Chen's future. The clerk spoke the traditional words. Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict upon which you are all agreed? We have. The entire courtroom held its breath, waiting to hear whether justice would mean prison for the former tech millionaire who had wanted nothing more than internet fame and had instead found infamy. 5 years had passed since that fateful day at Buckingham Palace. Marcus Chen pushed open the heavy doors of a London secondary school, carrying a worn leather briefcase. The school hall was filled with teenagers, their curious eyes following him as he walked to the podium. Gone were the designer clothes and flashy accessories. Marcus now wore a simple button-down shirt and slacks. After serving 18 months in prison, paying £250,000 in fines and compensation, and completing mandatory counseling, he had dedicated himself to a different kind of life. My name is Marcus Chen, he began, his voice steady, and I'm here to tell you about the worst decision of my life. The students sat up straighter, recognizing the name from their social media history lessons. Across town, James Barrett adjusted his uniform in front of a mirror. The scars had faded to barely visible lines, but they told a story. As the head trainer for new Queen's Guard recruits, he now shared his experience to prepare others for service. Sir, A young recruit approached him. "I saw that video before joining. It's why I decided to serve, seeing how you handled it with such dignity." Barrett nodded, remembering how his life had changed. The attack had led to improved security measures for guards and stricter penalties for tourist misconduct. His story had become part of the training curriculum. Back at the school, Marcus showed the infamous video. The students watched in silence as his past self committed the act that would reshape multiple lives. Some winced, others shook their heads in disbelief. "I thought followers and likes were everything," Marcus continued. "I had millions of dollars, but I wanted millions of views. That obsession destroyed everything I had built and, more importantly, hurt an innocent man and his family." After his release, Marcus had founded the Digital Responsibility Foundation, using most of his remaining wealth to educate young people about social media ethics and the consequences of online actions. He lived now in a modest London flat, a far cry from his Silicon Valley mansion. That evening, an unexpected meeting took place at a small cafe near St. James's Park. Marcus sat across from James Barrett, both men older and wiser than when they first crossed paths. It wasn't their first meeting since the incident. They had initially met during the restorative justice program during Marcus's sentence, but these occasional check-ins had become important to both men's healing. "The new regulations are working well," Barrett said, stirring his tea. "Haven't had a serious incident since they were implemented." Marcus nodded, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility. "The students today asked good questions. They understand social media influence better than we did." Their conversation was interrupted by a young woman approaching their table. She recognized them both, but her reaction wasn't what it would have been years ago. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but I just wanted to thank you both. Your story helped me understand the responsibility that comes with having an online platform." After she left, both men sat in thoughtful silence. Their story had become more than just a viral video or a cautionary tale. It had sparked real change in how people thought about social media fame and respect for tradition. Marcus's foundation had helped implement social media responsibility programs in schools across Britain and America. He never returned to the tech industry, finding more fulfillment in preventing others from making his mistakes. Barrett had received numerous commendations for his work training new guards, and his experience had led to positive changes in how ceremonial guards were protected and respected worldwide. Sarah had given birth to their second child, and their family had found strength in adversity. As the evening drew to a close, the two men stood to leave. No longer victim and attacker, they had become unlikely partners in teaching others about consequences, dignity, and redemption. "Same time next month?" Barrett asked, extending his hand. Marcus shook it firmly, grateful for this small gesture of forgiveness that he knew he'd spend the rest of his life earning. "I'll be here." They walked out into the London evening, going their separate ways but connected by a shared purpose. Their story had evolved from a viral moment of shame into a lasting lesson about responsibility, respect, and the long journey of redemption. The sun set over London, casting long shadows across the palace grounds where it had all began. Two men who had once been on opposite sides of a viral video had found purpose in its aftermath, turning a moment of infamy into years of positive change. The story of the rich tourist and the royal guard had become something neither man had expected, a testament to the power of genuine redemption and the possibility of finding meaning in life's darkest moments.